Hi guys, my name is Grover from Audeze. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the first in our Audeze Discovery production series. So this is designed to be an educational series to help you guys learn some interesting tips and tricks about production, about mixing, engineering, mastering, all those sorts of things. In terms of production, mixing, mastering, engineering, that kind of thing, I've been a musician for a long time and worked actually before coming to Audeze in the mixing and engineering space for classical, jazz, and other more purist forms of music. I also did some time in the pop music industry. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about my take on reverb. So one of the really cool things about reverb is that it can be used as a tool from very, very purist productions all the way up to very pop-oriented, very highly produced kinds of productions. So we're going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite tricks, which is reverbing an entire mix. So reverbing an entire mix is kind of a cool thing to do in the sense that it can function in place of additional EQ and compression. So it'll take, not only will it take the sounds and put them in space and allow you to add a spatiality and a depth to your mix, but it will also allow you to control some of the dynamics and to control some of the tonal shape of your mix in a way that EQ and compression don't necessarily allow you to do. So it's a little bit of a different tool in your toolbox. It has a different effect than either of those. You might use it in a different situation. And we're going to show you what some of those are. So you also notice today I'm wearing my LCD2 closebacks. These are currently actually one of my favorites. I know they're not the most expensive headphone we make, but they're one of my favorites if I need closebacks for mixing, mastering, or just monitoring things. I find the frequency response actually to be very, very accurate. So first up, you'll see I've got my DAW here, Reaper. And this piece of music is actually a jazz trio, which I recorded for use in the reference line overview, which I did with Chris Behrens. If you haven't seen that video, definitely check it out. It's a lot of fun. And Chris goes over all of the professional line headphones that we make, all the reference line headphones, does a great job of it. Anyways, so this is a fairly simple mix of just piano, drums, and bass. It's representative of what might be possible with a small jazz trio. So let's just take a listen. I'm going to turn the reverb on the Masterbus off for the moment, and we're just going to take a listen. I've got, the bass, the drums, and the piano, and then I also have added just a little MIDI bass to thicken up the stand-up upright bass that I recorded because it was a little bit thin. But other than that, there's no effects other than a safety limiter on each track. As you can hear, we've got a fairly nice but somewhat dry mix. So this is a good example of a mix that, if you have well-recorded samples or a good room, you might do. So what we're going to do now is take our reverb, and I want this mix to be a little bit larger and a little more spacious sounding, but I don't want to lose that kind of dry players playing in a room sense of sound to it. So I'm actually going to reset my settings, and we're going to listen to just what this reverb sounds like by itself. So this is Cinematic Rooms from Liquid Sonics. This is the default preset. I really like the Liquid Sonics reverbs. They're great for doing super, super purist things, and they're also really good for doing things that are a little bit less purist. We'll take a look at later on. But let's just take a listen to the default vanilla setting here. So pretty plummy and way too much, right? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this down to an equal mix of dry and wet. So still super, super wet, still probably quite a bit too much. So one of the things I like to do when I'm using a reverb for Masterbus work is I'll actually reduce the reverb time to under 1 second. So for this one, I usually go between 60 and 80, 0.16, 0.80. Let's try 0.78. Let's see how that works. So you can hear that dries things up quite a bit. It's a lot less splashy than it was, but it's still got a little bit too much reverb for my taste. So I'm actually going to take the amount of reverb that I'm getting. And cinematic rooms is really nice because you can change between the amount of reflections, the amount of reverb you're getting. I love a more reflection heavy sound. You might like a more reverb heavy sound, but the reverb will add a little more splash, especially to the top end. I'm also going to take down the amount of reverb that we're getting by about 1.5 dB. So you can hear now that we've taken the reverb down a little bit, added a little more reflections in. We've got a much drier sound, especially in the very, very top end. It's not quite so splashy. There's not quite such a long tail. We're getting a little bit more of that dry room sound. I'm also going to take down the reflections just a little bit because they are a little heavy. So that's a lot better. You can hear now we're starting to get a thicker sound to the mix without losing the clarity. It's starting to become quite a bit more clear. I'm also going to take this bass multiplier up. Now you can do this with normal EQ that's, you know, it comes stock in your DAW or something like that, but I like to use the level multiplier because it actually applies the changes to the algorithms. That's a cool function of some of the Liquid Sonics reverbs and some of the other high quality reverbs. So now I've kind of got my reverb tuned in, I think close to where I want the shape of it to be. So now what I tend to do is I take the reverb completely out. So we can listen to this dry again for a second. And let's listen to it with a totally equal mix between dry and wet. So now what I want to do is I want to slowly add in the dry, and I'm looking to actually move a little further past the point where I'll finally set the reverb to get it to somewhere where I can tell that it's obviously working. I can hear the decay trails very obviously, and then back it off from there, and then increase it and back it off, increase it, back it off, until I find that right spot where I can start to tell, compared to no reverb, that I've got a sense of widening of the mix, that the mix is getting bigger and the bass is getting a little fuller and the tonality is getting a little denser and a little richer. I want that point to be kind of subtle though, right? So if that point is at like 0, where I can really tell it's working, I want to back that off by like 1.5 dB or like 2 dB. And I find that my settings, depending on the reverb, tend to end up anywhere between, you know, -22 and -3. Depends on how obvious the reverb is. With a real short reverb tail like this, we can probably crank a fair amount of wet signal into the reverb and have it still sound pretty subtle. So let's do that. can hear the reverb is giving things a little bit more of a sense of space. It's putting them in a unified space a little bit more because the reverb is on the entire tune. It's on the Masterbus. But it's also making things a little bit bigger, right? We've got a little bit of extra low end going on, but it's not too plummy or too boosted. It's still defined, and it actually adds a little extra sense of definition without reducing the sense of resolution or without overly compressing things. So you can put a compressor on the Masterbus, but if you smash it too hard, you know, things will sound up front, but they'll eventually start to get the life sucked out of them, the dynamics sucked out of them. And one thing that the reverb doesn't do is it doesn't suck out the dynamics. So it does even out the dynamics because it's putting everything in a space, but it's helping to manage them rather than squash them. So reverb is a really good way. I mean, you might need to turn down the gain if you're running really, really hot signal and no Masterbus compressor. But one of the things about the Liquid Sonics reverbs that I really like is that you can add a very small amount of them, and it's subtle, but it's still making a big difference. So you can hear the mix now is a lot more glued together, and has a sense of being bigger and being wider, and having a more expansive sound to it without ruining the clarity. And this is something that I would do back when I was doing actually classical or jazz recordings. Was I would add a very, very small amount, much smaller even than this, like negative 18 or even lower, just to get a little bit of tonal richness going on in the mix, and just to add a sense of expansive space and a sense of hugeness to the mix that we weren't using compressors as much to get with, especially more purist forms of music like classical and jazz. So this is a good way to use this in a very subtle context for something like a jazz trio. Let's take a look now at something a little bit more conventionally pop oriented. This is a sort of funk backing track. It's a little bit more like something you would hear in a pop mix context or a soul music context maybe. It's relatively unmixed. Let me just disable I've already got a reverb on here. Let me just disable that. And let's take a listen to this and see what it sounds like with no reverb on the Masterbus. And then we'll put some reverb on the Masterbus, play around with it, and we'll see what we get. So you can see it's a little more modern context in terms of the productions, a little more effects on things. It's still relatively dry mix, but there's a bit busier mix going on. So let's fire up our Masterbus reverb, and you can see I've got, as before, Liquid Sonics. This time I'm using 7th Heaven, which is a Bricasti M7 model, essentially. It's the best Bricasti M7 model I've used in the software domain. I've used a couple of real ones, but this one is my favorite. So we're going to reset this to all of the stock settings, turn off the EQ, and we'll just give a listen to this real quick. Let's reduce this to 0 and see what we've got. So obviously, again, way too much reverb. I do like this gold hall setting though, because it's pretty dense, and I think it's the right choice to add a little density to this mix. It's a little bit thin. So again, let's take that reverb down, and since this is a fairly tight mix, we don't need much. Probably 0.6 seconds will be good. Again, we're gonna lose about 1.5 dB of the late reverb, so we want a little more of the reflection. And we have the low frequency turned down a bit. That's fine. Pre-delay I like to leave at 11 seconds or below to get sort of the Haas effect delay, which adds a sense of there being a real room. That's a psychoacoustic effect. Let's take a listen to what we've got here now. That's pretty good, but I think we need to add a low cut at around 50 hertz and a low frequency boost to get a little extra richness. Probably 2.5 dB is high, but we'll try it at about 100 hertz. Let's see what we get now. Kind of like that. Let's now, let's try and see if we can blend in enough of this. This might be too heavy, but we'll see what we get. So there we go. So now you can see we've still got, as before, a fairly subtle reverb compared to a lot of genres. It's not an indie rock reverb or anything like that. Not something you would hear in a Florence and the Machine type of production where it's a huge, expansive, very long-tailed reverb. But it adds a little snap and a little bit of density to a mix without EQing it. If I just brought up the bass or I had just compressed things more, I would have sucked more life out of the mix. And rather than having a thin mix that now didn't groove, I was able to get the bass and the kick grooving a little bit better without having to revert to EQ and compression tools, which can sometimes suck life out of the mix in other ways or have effects on the Masterbus that you might not want. So it also adds a little spatiality to the high frequencies, the guitars especially. They sit a little bit more in a space. And again, it has that gluing effect where everything gets glued a little closer together. And even though this Seventh Heaven is a denser, to me, richer, less clean reverb than the Cinematic Rooms, you still can get it to kind of snap a little bit without sounding plummy or too fat in the low end. So this is a really cool tool. Once you get the reverb keyed in right, and you can even spend a lot more time with this decay and these delay knobs on any reverb as well to get it keyed into the exact tempo of the song, right? And an easy way to do that is to take the beats per minute and just do the simple math, figure out how many seconds are in your chosen tempo, and then set your pre-delay and your decay times to interact with those and tempo sync them. So tempo syncing this kind of really short reverb can be kind of cool. It almost is like a really, really short slapback echo or delay with just a very, very low wet mix, and it makes things, it's almost an ambiance instead of a reverb, and it gives things a little sense of space, and it can help the groove to snap a little bit harder. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please, I know you've heard this spiel a million times, but like, subscribe, share if you did enjoy it. Also, please leave a comment if you'd like to see more like this, or if you'd like us to do something different or to try something new. We're making these videos for you guys, and we do read all the comments, and we'd like you to enjoy the content that we're putting out. So get in touch with us and let us know what you thought.